Welcome back to Trust Your Eyes. What a round 14 it was. North Melbourne almost pulled off the upset of the season. The Bulldogs and Lions stay within touch of the top 8, and Sydney dominated yet another second half. But we start at the MCG on Saturday afternoon. It was Dustin Martin's 300th game. He started on fire, kicking the first goal of the match, but Hawthorn were just too classy. So how will you remember the game? I think I'll remember it for what happened after the game and that kind of finale between Dustin Martin and the 92,000 people there, mainly Richmond, but quite a few Hawthorn fans there as well that appreciated him at the time, and he appreciated them back, which I thought was fantastic. Now, the interview with Jack Riewoldt was a bit anticlimactic because Martin basically answered every question the same way, which is fair enough. He's a man of very few words, but I really liked the way he gestured to everyone. It felt like he was speaking and acknowledging all 92,000 people there by just clapping and pointing to them and saying how appreciative he was, in the build-up of the week and in the moment. So I thought it was fantastic, really well done by the crowd, the AFL, and Martin himself, who I didn't quite know how he would react, but it was really good. Now, in the game itself, Hawthorn were just way too classy. They're continuing on their ways. And the other thing I'll remember for this day was the arrival of Nick Watson. Now, I know he kicked 1 goal 4 in the end and missed another 1 or 2 shots, but he has serious speed and power for a man his size. He causes a lot of headaches, and it could have been his day if he had kicked straight, because he could have ended up with 4 or 5 goals. The Pies did it again. Down by as much as 54 points against North Melbourne, they pulled off yet another comeback and close game victory. So did the Kangas lose this, or did Collingwood win it? Well, normally in these situations, I say the side that was winning and had the big margin blew it, but I'm actually going to say the reverse. I'm going to say that Collingwood won this game more than North Melbourne lost it. And the reason is because with about 5 minutes left, when Collingwood hit the front, I thought this was all over and they were going to win by 4 or 5 goals. But credit to North Melbourne, maybe their mentality switched up, because they became really attacking and caused a lot of problems for Collingwood, who had to manage the game, which we know they do so well. And they did need a little bit of luck with the 50-metre penalty that should have been there to Bailey Scott, the Nick Dacos handball, which really was a throw, incorrect disposal, but in the time that was a little difficult to see. It was mainly the 50-metre penalty that a lot of people took issue with. And then the finishing play with Zach Fisher kicking the ball and going to the wrong side of the post. At home watching, I thought it went through for a goal and was thinking, wow, what a great win for North Melbourne and what a bad loss for Collingwood. But it wasn't the case. The Pies' experience, strength, know-how, and Nick Dacos getting off the chain won them this game. And if that behind for Zach Fisher went through for a goal, I actually think North Melbourne, in the grand scheme of things, would have been the ones who stole this game. And under the radar game was the Giants hosting Port Adelaide. It was a 22-point win for the Orange Tsunami, who are up to 5th, while Port Adelaide dropped to 7th, and both sides are on 32 points. It feels like people are down on the Power overall. Is this fair or unfair? This overall feeling about Port Adelaide for me is very fair. Their last 6 games they are 3-3, but you've got to have a look at a deeper dive. One of those wins was against North Melbourne in Tasmania. The other win was that fluke miracle comeback of the ages against Hawthorn, and the other win was a 1-goal win over Geelong, in which they played one really good half and really bad half. So overall, I think it's fair to say that Port Adelaide's form just isn't great, and it's that of a bottom 8 side. The forward line is dysfunctional. I'm fine with Charlie Dixon going out because he can barely move. He's got a little bit of Tom Hawkins about him right now, where the movement isn't there and he's just not using his power at this stage to dominate games. And then the midfield's a bit out of form. Rosie, injury interrupted, can't get any continuity, and it's showing in his performance. Butters was tagged, and Horne-Francis is still a little young, probably a couple years off being, the guy in that midfield. And then in defence, Radigalia was sent up forward, such was his play against Jesse Hogan, and Alira just can't get his intercept game going. Now, Port have a pretty tough finish to the year. Their back half is difficult, so I think they're a bit of a contender to drop out the top 8 here and make way for the Lions, Bulldogs, or even the Hawks. There was a party in Adelaide on Saturday night, an Amartey party. He kicked 9 goals, 1 from 10 disposals, as Sydney went up a gear in the third quarter to maul the Crows. How did it go so wrong for Adelaide so quickly? Well, Amartey had quite a bit to do with it, and after his 7th goal and Taylor Adams taunting, putting up the 7-goal sign with his fingers, and Mitch Hinge gave away that free kick which led to an Adams goal which made the score 75-60. That was the turning point, and you saw the tale of both sides' seasons. From that point on, Sydney looked invincible. They were just playing with so much confidence. Heaney and Goulden were outstanding again, and even though Warner was getting tagged, just didn't care. He just tried to run through people and try anything at any time. And on the other side, we saw with Adelaide drop of their heads, experienced players are not playing well. I think Laird got a lot of the ball, but just isn't having the same impact. And Dawson faded throughout the match, but he is carrying, some form of an injury right now. So it's the tale of both sides' seasons. And then Amartey, it was just his night. It was a career night. It will probably never happen again. The most he had kicked before was 4 goals. And to have 10 touches, 10 scores, which 9 are goals. The ball was falling into his lap. And then paired with Mark Keane, who had probably his worst game for Adelaide. He kicked 9 goals, so well done to him. He's over 30 for the season. Probably not in all-Australian contention or anything like that, but is no doubt becoming the main man in that Sydney forward line. Fremantle came crashing down back to earth. 2 weeks after their 92-point win over Melbourne, they lost to the Western Bulldogs by 67 points. Does the result show more about the Bulldogs or Dockers? I'm going to say it's more about the Western Bulldogs, who I thought were really impressive for a large majority of the game. It was the first time in a while we saw the full-strength midfield with Bonampelli, Adam Treloar, Ed Richards and Tom Liberatore, kind of their new big four, because Ed Richards adds a whole new dimension in the forward half of the team, and we know what Liberatore brings. Now, they still got some players back. They got the bye, so hopefully after this 2-week layoff they can get back Darcy and, more importantly, Aaron Norton, and even a James Harms, who was playing really good before he did his hamstring. So I think the team is looking pretty stable at this point. There is a weak point in Buku Karmas, who's had to play in defence. I think James O'Donnell and Liam Jones are looking good, and the other defenders' form throughout the season has been solid, but Buku is a weak point. They got a tough fixture ahead. They do have North Melbourne next, which you think they should win, which should put them at 8 wins and 7 losses and gives them a shot to make the top 8. But they do have a lot of tough away games, and it will really test them out. Fremantle's still young. They still have their inconsistencies. I think they'll bounce back next week against Gold Coast. If they don't iron out these deficiencies and inconsistencies, then everyone's still going to be unsure about them. I still like them. They have a relatively soft fixture, and I still wouldn't rule them out for top 4, but it was a very bad day. The tag in the past couple of weeks is back in vogue. Is it really here to stay? Or like in previous years, is it just the trend at the moment? I'm going to say it's more of a trend than something that will stay here for the rest of the season and the future. The big question around it for me that I've always had is there a correlation between tagging and winning football games? And I'm not really sure there is. Let's have a look at this week. St Kilda used Windhager on Lachie Neale. They lost. Adelaide put Michael Annie on Chad Warner for most of that game. They lost. North Melbourne used Will Phillips and then Liam Shields on Nick Dacos, and that backfired especially in the second half. And GWS used Toby Bedford on Zach Butters, were the only side that won. So from this week, it's just 25% of the teams that use the tagger actually won the game. And there are weak points when tagging. It can be manipulated. Say with a guy like Bonampelli or Dacos, you can put them forward of the ball or a half-back. You can use them in different roles to create confusion. And then the big problem is when you are losing and you're 5 or 6 goals down chasing the game and you drop the tag, it means the player who's been held all day is now free and probably going to dominate because they'll get a fair bit of the ball and have that freedom because it's normally the best player on the opposition side. So there's weak points with it. I know it's annoying for Supercoach and fantasy players, but through it, kind of watching the game over the past few seasons, I think it'll kind of go away naturally, and within a couple months, we'll forget that most sides were using a tagger during the midway point of this season. There are some huge games next week. Predict the winner of Carlton versus Geelong, GWS versus Sydney, Port Adelaide versus Brisbane, and Fremantle versus Gold Coast. Well, in the first game, I'll go Carlton. Overall, they're in better form. Ball movement's looking good. The midfield's back to its best, and I think their defence will overwhelm the Geelong forward line, especially with Tom Hawkins and Jeremy Cameron out of a bit of form. In the Battle of the Bridge, I'll take the Giants. Their slick ball movement was back. They used a lot of handballs. Did get them in trouble at times against Port Adelaide, but when they got through, they looked powerful. And also, I think Sydney is due for a bad game, so I'm going to pick the Giants to roll the Swans and give them their second loss of the season. Port Adelaide against Brisbane. People are down on Port, even myself, but I'm going to back them in to bounce back at home in a really important game against a side nipping at their tails. There's a lot of pressure on them. Teams seem to bounce back relatively strong when there is intense scrutiny, which there will be in Adelaide. So I think that the midfield trio can have a good game. Butters, Rosie and Horne-Francis. And they need Todd Marshall to fire on the forward line. And finally, I'll back Freo at home at Optus Oval to get over the Gold Coast Suns, who have a horrible record away from their home ground. And I think that Fremantle will bounce back in a very strong win. Thanks for listening to Trust Your Eyes for round 14. Good luck to all your teams, and I'll be back soon.